She had the appearance of any struggling grad student. When the plane started plummeting, fighter jets scrambled to intercept. "Get us patched through to Viper now," their transmission demanded. Every eye turned to the unassuming woman in seat 31F. What was her story? Before we get into it, let us know where you're tuning in from, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Captain Reagan Viper Vance settled into the tight confines of seat 31F on American Airlines Flight 1842, her laptop precariously perched on the fold-down tray as she chipped away at her doctoral thesis. At 29, she could have been any other postgraduate student flying from Phoenix to Chicago on a Wednesday morning in October 2026. With her dark hair thrown up in a haphazard bun, she wore a well-loved Caltech sweatshirt and ripped jeans, and her backpack overflowed with textbooks and notes. The flight attendant, Liam, offered her a small packet of pretzels. "Big exam coming up?" he asked, smiling warmly at the complex fluid dynamics textbooks spilling out of her bag. "Working on my thesis," Reagan mumbled, her eyes glued to the laptop screen, which was filled with intricate computational equations. "Trying to wrap it up before my defense next semester." The executive next to her, Michael Chen, caught a glimpse of her screen and saw what seemed like advanced rocketry schematics. "Computational fluid dynamics?" he inquired, intrigued. "Something in that ballpark," Reagan said, non-committally, quickly minimizing the window that displayed her classified work on advanced scramjet designs. Just some theoretical modeling for next-gen engines. What Michael had no way of knowing was that the exhausted-looking student beside him was, in reality, one of the most secret and skilled pilots in the United States Air Force. Reagan Viper Vance held a clearance that went beyond top secret and had dedicated the last 6 years to flight testing experimental aircraft that officially did not exist. Her call sign, Viper, was earned during her brutal test pilot training after she successfully navigated a series of flight profiles so dangerous they had claimed the lives of 2 pilots before her. Her cover as a Caltech doctoral student was flawless. To her civilian acquaintances, she was just another brilliant mind buried in theoretical research. Nobody could have guessed she routinely piloted aircraft that wouldn't be unveiled to the public for at least another 15 years. But Reagan was getting weary of the deception. The constant juggling of her academic cover and her true mission at a classified Nevada test range was taking its toll. She was giving serious thought to coming clean about her real identity and leaving the world of black projects for good. Captain Miller had been flying for major airlines for nearly 2 decades, but he'd never encountered a situation like the one that unfolded at 11:38 a.m. over northern Arizona. American Flight 1842 was cruising smoothly at 33,000 feet when a pilot's deepest fear materialized. "Chicago Center, American 1842, we have an emergency." Captain Miller's voice was taut, laced with controlled urgency. "We have an engine fire indication on engine number 1 and are feeling extreme vibrations across the airframe." "American 1842, Chicago Center understands. Are you able to maintain your altitude?" "Negative, Chicago. Engine 1 has completely failed and number 2 is giving us erratic readings. We are declaring an emergency and commencing an immediate descent." But the crisis was just beginning to escalate. As Captain Miller and First Officer Davis ran through their emergency protocols, a sequence of loud bangs echoed through the aircraft. What began as a single engine failure was spiraling into a total systems collapse. "We're losing hydraulic pressure," First Officer Davis announced, his voice strained. "Flight controls are going sluggish." In the main cabin, 137 souls felt the aircraft lurch and tremble as system after system went offline. Oxygen masks deployed from the overhead panels, and cries of panic erupted as passengers grasped the severity of the situation. Reagan recognized the unmistakable feel of an aircraft in critical distress. Her instincts as a pilot took over, and she began to analyze the noises, vibrations, and motions that were just terrifying chaos to everyone else. This was no simple emergency. It was a cascading failure, the kind that almost always ended in the complete loss of the aircraft and everyone aboard. She shut her laptop, her full attention now on the cockpit communications she could just barely overhear. The pilots were grappling with multiple simultaneous emergencies, and the stress was palpable in their voices. When American Flight 1842 declared its emergency in Arizona airspace, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, immediately escalated the situation. Any commercial airliner experiencing multiple system failures over the American Southwest was an automatic red flag for military intervention. This specific emergency, however, was happening in one of the nation's most sensitive air corridors. The route passed near several top-secret military sites, including test ranges where experimental aircraft were a daily sight. Any aviation incident in this region demanded an immediate military presence. "Sir," reported Captain Jessica Dunn to Colonel Marcus Thorne at NORAD headquarters, "we have a commercial aircraft in distress within the restricted Sierra airspace. Reports indicate multiple system failures and a potential loss of control." "What is the aircraft type and number of souls on board?" Colonel Thorne demanded. "Boeing 737, 137 people. They are currently descending through flight level 310 and are requesting an emergency landing at Las Vegas." "Scramble F-22s from Edwards now," Colonel Thorne commanded. "I want that plane shadowed and evaluated. If it comes down in a restricted zone, we need to secure that wreckage instantly." In a matter of minutes, 2 F-22 Raptor fighters from the 44th Fighter Group at Edwards Air Force Base were thundering into the sky, climbing swiftly to intercept the stricken airliner. Major Leo Wolf Harding and Captain Maya Ghost Jimenez were seasoned test pilots themselves, selected for this mission because of their clearance to operate within the sensitive airspace where the emergency was unfolding. Chicago Center, Wolf Flight is airborne, climbing to intercept American 1842, Major Harding reported. "Wolf Flight, American 1842 is descending through flight level 280 with multiple critical failures. Provide escort and assess the aircraft's structural integrity." As the F-22s closed in on the intercept point, they were preparing for what should have been a standard escort mission. But standard was about to become legendary. As the F-22 Raptors maneuvered into formation beside American Flight 1842, the pilots immediately saw the extent of the damage. Engine number 1 was completely gone, and scorch marks ran along the wing and the side of the fuselage. "Wolf 1 has eyes on American 1842, Major Harding reported. Confirming Engine 1 is destroyed. There's visible fire damage to the wing assembly. The aircraft appears to be in a controlled descent, but it's in very bad shape." Back at NORAD, intelligence analysts were cross-referencing the passenger manifest for Flight 1842, a standard protocol for any aviation emergency near sensitive military installations. "Sir," said Staff Sergeant Ben Carter to Colonel Thorne, "you'll want to see this manifest." "What is it, Sergeant?" "Passenger in seat 31F is listed as Reagan Vance. When I cross-referenced her in our secure databases, something else came up." Colonel Thorne leaned over the monitor, his heart rate quickening. The grad student on the manifest was actually Captain Reagan Viper Vance, one of the most highly classified test pilots in the entire Air Force. "Are you positive about this identification?" Thorne asked, his voice low. "Confirmed, sir. Captain Reagan Vance, call sign Viper. Current assignment is the Aegis program at the Nevada Test and Training Range. Clearance is above top secret, specializing in experimental hypersonic vehicles." Colonel Thorne grasped the full gravity of the situation instantly. Not only was a commercial airliner in peril over restricted military airspace, but one of the nation's most irreplaceable and secret assets was on that plane. "Get me a secure channel to the F-22s, Thorne ordered, "and get the Nevada range on the line." They have a right to know their lead pilot is in this mess. Aboard American Flight 1842, the situation was degrading by the second. Captain Miller and First Officer Davis were wrestling with an aircraft that was becoming nearly impossible to control. The cascade of system failures had stripped them of their options, and their window for reaching an airport was closing fast. "Chicago Center, American 1842, Captain Miller transmitted, his voice showing the strain. "We're losing more systems. I'm not sure we can keep her in a controlled state for much longer." It was at that moment that a new voice cut through on a military frequency the airliner's radio was able to pick up. A transmission that changed everything. "American 1842, this is Wolf 1. We are advised you have Captain Reagan Vance on board. We need to speak with Viper immediately." In seat 31F, Reagan felt a jolt. Her painstakingly constructed cover had just been vaporized by military pilots who somehow knew her real name and her call sign. All the passengers nearby were now staring, utterly bewildered by the military jargon they couldn't possibly understand. Michael Chen, the executive beside her, looked at her with dawning comprehension. Did they just say Viper? "Are you in the military?" Before Reagan could formulate a response, Captain Miller's voice crackled over the cabin's intercom system. "Captain Vance, this is Captain Miller. We require your presence in the cockpit immediately. We have an emergency situation that demands your expertise." The entire cabin went dead silent as 137 people processed the fact that the grad student in the faded sweatshirt was someone far different from who she appeared to be. "Ma'am," said Liam, the flight attendant, as Reagan stood, "are you actually a captain?" "It's complicated," Reagan said, moving toward the front of the plane, leaving her thesis behind for what was about to become the most critical flight of her entire life. When Reagan stepped into the cockpit of American Flight 1842, she immediately saw the depth of the crisis. The instrument panel was a chaotic constellation of warning lights, and she could hear the sheer effort in the pilots' voices as they fought to keep the crippled plane flying. "Give me the status," Reagan said to Captain Miller, her voice transforming from that of a student to a seasoned military officer. "Engine 1 is gone," Miller reported quickly. "Engine 2 is running rough and bleeding power. We've lost our primary hydraulics, and the backups are failing. Controls are barely responsive." Reagan's eyes darted across the instruments, her mind processing the data with the speed of someone who had faced emergencies in aircraft far more sophisticated and unforgiving than a Boeing 737. Her experience testing hypersonic prototypes had conditioned her to rapidly diagnose and react to multiple catastrophic failures. "What's our fuel situation?" she asked. "About 40 minutes at our current burn rate," First Officer Davis replied. "Nearest viable airport?" "Las Vegas is roughly 55 miles to the southwest, but with our descent rate and control issues, I don't think we'll make it." Reagan performed a series of swift mental calculations, factoring in the aircraft's condition, remaining fuel, and potential glide characteristics. Her experience flying experimental vehicles that were expected to fail catastrophically had taught her to find solutions where conventional manuals offered none. "We're making it to Vegas," she stated, with the authority of a pilot who had landed planes in far worse shape. "But we'll have to use some non-standard procedures." "Wolf 1, this is Viper," Reagan broadcast on the secure military channel. "I am in the cockpit of American 1842 and have assessed the situation." "Viper, Wolf 1. Ma'am, it is an honor. What do you require?" Reagan's reply showcased exactly why she was chosen for the most perilous flight tests in modern aviation. "Wolf Flight, I need you to coordinate with Las Vegas Tower for an emergency clearance. I also need continuous real-time weather and wind data for the approach vector." "Roger that, Viper. We're on it." What transpired next was something unheard of in the history of commercial aviation. A passenger airliner was being guided to safety by one of the most elite test pilots in the Air Force, escorted by two of the most advanced fighter jets ever created. "Captain Miller," Reagan said, I'm going to walk you through some techniques we use for dead stick landings in experimental craft. You won't find these procedures in any commercial flight manual, but they're effective when conventional methods fail. Miller listened intently as Reagan outlined advanced flight concepts that were normally classified and reserved for the most extreme test flight scenarios. "Captain Vance," First Officer Davis interjected, "what kind of planes do you usually fly?" "The kind that technically don't exist," Reagan replied, without a hint of irony. As Reagan collaborated with the American Airlines crew to stabilize the failing aircraft, the F-22 pilots were receiving more information about the woman-saving Flight 1842. Back at NORAD, classified personnel files were being opened, painting a portrait of one of the most vital and accomplished pilots in the American military. "Wolf 1, this is NORAD," came the encrypted transmission. "We are uploading a classified backgrounder on Captain Vance. It is imperative you understand who you are assisting. Major Harding and Captain Jimenez received a data packet that made them realize they were part of aviation history." Captain Reagan Viper Vance was not just a test pilot. She was the lead project pilot for the Aegis program, a hypersonic vehicle program so secret that its existence was unknown to most of the military. Viper has more direct experience with in-flight emergencies than any active pilot, the briefing stated. She holds records for landing aircraft after total engine failure, cascading system breakdowns, and structural damage that would have disintegrated a conventional airframe. "My God," Captain Jimenez whispered to her wingman. "Wolf, do you get what's happening here? She's flying a commercial jet using principles developed for a hypersonic spy plane." "I know," Major Harding responded. "It's like watching an astronaut land a school bus." What Reagan did next was a masterclass in why she was entrusted with the most dangerous assignments in military aviation. Applying techniques developed for experimental planes that were designed to fail, she began to coach Captain Miller on how to fly the severely compromised Boeing 737 as if it were a massive glider. "Captain Miller," Reagan instructed, "standard procedures assume you have functional control surfaces. We don't. We are going to switch to an energy management flight profile that gives us the best possible chance of reaching that runway." She talked him through a series of maneuvers that no commercial pilot ever trained for, techniques for flying a damaged airframe that had been perfected through years of testing experimental craft that frequently suffered critical failures. "Reduce power on Engine 2 to the absolute minimum," Reagan ordered. "We're going to use gravity and aerodynamics to control our descent, not engine thrust." "But that's counter to every emergency procedure we've ever learned," First Officer Davis protested. "Commercial training assumes you're flying a fundamentally sound aircraft," Reagan explained. "When your systems completely fail, you need to rely on techniques that don't require them." The F-22 pilots watched, mesmerized, as the crippled airliner began to move in ways that defied their understanding of how a large passenger jet should behave in an emergency. "Ghost, are you seeing this?" Captain Jimenez asked her wingman. "I have never seen anything like it," Major Harding replied. "She's flying that 737 like an unpowered glider, using techniques I didn't even know were possible." As American Flight 1842 began its final approach into Las Vegas, Reagan managed the descent with the meticulous precision of a test flight operation. She had her F-22 escort providing up-to-the-second weather reports, air traffic control clearing the path and scrambling emergency crews, and the commercial pilots executing procedures that had never been attempted outside of a classified test. Program: Las Vegas Tower, American 1842 Heavy Emergency Inbound, Reagan transmitted. "Be advised, we are on an experimental approach profile due to multiple critical system failures." American 1842, Las Vegas Tower. "We have emergency crews on standby. Runway 25L is all yours." But Reagan knew this landing would take more than a clear runway. The damaged jet needed perfect conditions and flawless execution to get down in one piece. "Wolf Flight," Reagan transmitted. "I need you to fly my wing and call out any lateral drift." With our control issues, I might not feel a deviation until it's too late. Roger, Viper. We're glued to you all the way down. As they descended through 10,000 feet, Reagan initiated the final stage of her emergency plan, techniques developed for landing experimental aircraft after a total loss of hydraulics. "Captain Miller," she said, "what I'm about to show you is not in any textbook, but it will work. We are going to land this plane using only differential engine thrust and aerodynamic controls." The final approach to Las Vegas runway 25L was unlike anything seen in commercial aviation. Reagan coached Captain Miller through a landing technique that had been designed for experimental craft that regularly lost all conventional flight controls. "Increase thrust slightly on engine 2, Reagan instructed as they passed 1,000 feet. "We'll use asymmetric thrust for pitch control since our elevators are gone." The method was so radical and counterintuitive that it had never been tried on a commercial airliner. But Reagan's deep experience with experimental vehicles that frequently suffered total system failure had taught her how to make an aircraft fly when conventional wisdom said it couldn't. "Viper, Wolf 1, Major Harding transmitted. Your approach looks solid. Descent rate is nominal. Thanks, Wolf 1. Miller, you're doing perfectly. Trust the process and trust the plane." At 500 feet, an unexpected crosswind pushed the aircraft to the right of the runway's center line. Captain Miller started to overcorrect, but Reagan's steady voice reined him in. "Easy correction with the throttle. Don't wrestle the aircraft. Flow with it." "We've got this." The Boeing 737 touched down with a heavier than normal jolt, but Captain Miller successfully kept the plane centered and under control. As they decelerated down the runway, emergency vehicles swarmed the aircraft, prepared to assist any injured passengers. "American 1842, a truly magnificent job," the tower controller radioed. "Emergency crews are with you." In the passenger cabin, 137 people burst into applause, most of them completely unaware they had just been saved by aviation techniques decades ahead of their time. As American Flight 1842 rolled to a stop in Las Vegas, the F-22 Raptors executed a low-altitude flyby, a tribute usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or fallen comrades. Major Harding and Captain Jimenez were saluting the pilot who had saved 137 lives with skills most of the world would never comprehend. "Viper, Wolf 1, Major Harding transmitted. That was the single most impressive display of airmanship I have ever witnessed. You just rewrote the book on emergency aviation. Thanks, Wolf Flight," Reagan replied. "Just another day at the office." But it wasn't. What Reagan had done was extraordinary by any standard. She had taken control of a civilian airliner in the midst of a catastrophic failure and used classified experimental techniques to save 137 lives. As the passengers deplaned, many of them made a point to thank Reagan personally. Michael Chen, the executive who had sat next to her, was one of the last to leave. "I still can't process that I was sitting beside a test pilot," he said. "Why did you never mention you fly experimental planes?" Reagan offered a small smile. "Because I'm supposed to be a grad student." Or at least, I was. Within hours, Reagan's meticulously crafted cover was obliterated. News of the incredible landing spread like wildfire through the military and aviation sectors, and her instrumental role in saving Flight 1842 became a global story. "Secret test pilot saves airliner," the headlines blared. "Grad student unmasked as elite military aviator," wrote journalists, struggling to explain how a doctoral candidate possessed flying abilities that defied known civilian aviation practices. But Reagan's newfound fame created a massive headache for military security. Her involvement in classified programs was so sensitive that her very identity had been one of the nation's most protected secrets. Now that shield was gone, jeopardizing active projects and potentially threatening national security. "Captain Vance," said Colonel Sam Wallace during a tense debrief at Nellis Air Force Base, "your heroic action saved 137 lives, but you also exposed some of our most sensitive programs. "I understand, sir," Reagan said, "but I wasn't going to let those people die just to protect my cover." "We're not questioning your choice," Colonel Wallace clarified, "but we have to determine our next move. Your life as a graduate student is effectively over. The military was in uncharted territory. One of their most valuable pilots had been publicly revealed in the most dramatic way imaginable. But her actions had also saved over 100 civilian lives. 2 weeks after the American Flight 1842 incident, Reagan received new orders that would redefine her career. Instead of being reassigned to another black project, she was being tasked with a novel role that would leverage her unique skill set and her unexpected public profile. "Captain Vance," said General Evelyn Reed during a meeting at the Pentagon, "we are creating a new position just for you. You will serve as the military's liaison for civilian aviation safety, tasked with adapting advanced military flight techniques for the commercial sector." The assignment was unprecedented. For the first time, the military would be actively sharing some of its most advanced flight methodologies with civilian agencies, with Reagan serving as the bridge between the worlds of classified military research and commercial aviation. "Your performance on that American flight proved that military aviation knowledge can save civilian lives," General Reed stated. "We want you to create training programs to help commercial pilots manage emergencies with methods that were, until now, top secret." Reagan eagerly accepted the new role. Her cover was gone forever, but now she could serve her country in a new capacity that honored her military background and her dedication to aviation safety. "I want to ensure that what happened on Flight 1842 never has to rely on a stroke of luck again," Reagan told the general. "Commercial pilots deserve access to the best available techniques, even if they were born in classified programs." 6 months later, Reagan was leading a specialized course at the Federal Aviation Administration's Training Center in Oklahoma City. Her students were veteran commercial pilots, there to learn about advanced emergency procedures that had never been taught outside of military test facilities. "The techniques you are about to learn," Reagan told her inaugural class of airline captains, "were created for experimental aircraft that are designed to experience total system failure. These procedures can save your aircraft when conventional methods are no longer an option." She used the American Flight 1842 incident as her primary case study, detailing how experimental flight principles had been successfully applied to save a commercial jet. "When I entered that cockpit," she explained, "I had never flown a Boeing 737. But I understood the core principles of flight control in extreme conditions, and I could impart those principles to pilots who knew the 737 inside and out." The airline pilots were astounded by the techniques Reagan presented, procedures for flying. With complete hydraulic failure, methods of using asymmetric engine thrust to control aircraft pitch and roll, and energy management strategies that could dramatically extend an aircraft's glide distance. "Captain Vance," asked United Airlines Captain Laura Jensen, "why haven't these techniques been shared with commercial pilots before now?" "Because they were developed for aircraft and missions that were highly classified," Reagan answered candidly. "But the American flight proved that this knowledge can save civilian lives. So the military has authorized their declassification for emergency training." The training program Reagan created became the new standard for military-civilian collaboration in aviation safety. Airlines across the globe began sending their top pilots to learn the advanced emergency skills that had saved Flight 1842. Captain Vance's program has completely changed how we approach emergency procedure training, said International Air Transport Association Director David Lee. "She is disseminating knowledge that has the potential to save thousands of lives." The techniques proved their worth time and again. Within the first year of Reagan's program, commercial pilots using her methods successfully landed aircraft after failures that would have previously been deemed unsurvivable. We have documented 3 separate incidents in the last 6 months where commercial pilots used Captain Vance's techniques to save aircraft that would otherwise have been lost, reported FAA Administrator Maria Rodriguez. Her program is directly saving lives. Reagan also maintained her connection to the world of experimental aircraft, but her new dual role allowed her to immediately transfer emerging techniques from classified test programs into the civilian safety curriculum. The wall between military and civilian emergency procedures has been permanently dismantled, said test pilot Colonel Mark Jennings. Captain Vance demonstrated that knowledge developed for classified missions can serve a greater humanitarian good. 2 years after the American Flight 1842 incident, Reagan was promoted to major and given command of a new joint military-civilian test initiative at Edwards Air Force Base. Her new mission was to develop and test emergency procedures that would be universally applicable to both military and civilian pilots. Major Vance represents the future of military aviation, said Air Force Chief of Staff General Robert Hayes at her promotion ceremony. She proves that our most advanced knowledge can serve both our national security interests and the safety of the public. The ceremony was attended by many whose lives Reagan had impacted. Captain Miller and First Officer Davis from American Airlines spoke about how Reagan's methods were now a core part of their company's pilot training. Major Vance didn't just save our flight, Captain Miller told the attendees. She fundamentally changed how our entire industry prepares for the worst-case scenario. Major Harding and Captain Jimenez, the F-22 pilots who had escorted Flight 1842, were also present. They were now instructors in Reagan's Joint Training Program, teaching her advanced techniques to both military and civilian aviators. Flying with Viper during that emergency was the highlight of my career, Major Harding said. She taught us all that the best military techniques should be shared with anyone who can use them to save a life. 5 years after the incident that exposed her secret life and altered its course, Major Reagan Viper Vance was selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel and appointed Director of Advanced Aviation Safety at the Air Force Test Pilot School. Her new role made her responsible for developing and testing emergency procedures that would benefit the entire global aviation community. The techniques she had pioneered were now standard curriculum for pilots worldwide. Lieutenant Colonel Vance has fundamentally reshaped aviation safety, said NASA Administrator Dr. Evelyn Grant at the promotion ceremony. Her work closes the gap between purely experimental aviation and practical, life-saving emergency procedures. The passengers from American Flight 1842 never forgot the grad student who saved them. A large contingent attended Reagan's promotion ceremony, including Michael Chen, the executive who had sat beside her. Major Vance taught me that real heroes often hide in plain sight, Michael said during his speech. She looked like a stressed-out grad student, but she was one of the most capable pilots on the planet. Today, Lieutenant Colonel Reagan Viper Vance continues to serve in the Air Force, now as one of the most respected voices in military and civilian aviation safety. Her techniques are taught in flight schools across the globe, and her emergency procedures manual is required reading for pilots in over 40 countries. She sometimes returns to Caltech as a guest lecturer in the aerospace department, where students are awestruck to learn that a former colleague was a classified test pilot who saved 137 lives. The most critical lesson from my experience, Reagan tells them, is that knowledge must be shared when it has the power to save lives. The techniques I learned flying experimental planes were never just military secrets. They were tools that could help anyone in need. Her office at Edwards Air Force Base features a single-frame photo from American Flight 1842, not of the dramatic landing, but of her in seat 31F with her laptop, looking for all the world like just another grad student. It's a constant reminder that extraordinary skill often lies dormant behind an ordinary facade. The F-22 Raptors that escorted Flight 1842 continue to fly training sorties over the American Southwest. But the pilots who fly them know that one of their most vital missions was the day they helped a commercial airliner find its way to safety, guided by a test pilot whose call sign was synonymous with the highest form of aviation excellence. In airports around the world, passengers board their flights, unaware that their safety is partially owed to techniques developed by a woman who once occupied seat 31F. She appeared to be just another tired grad student, but she was, in fact, one of the most gifted pilots ever to grace the skies. She was just a student at 33,000 feet in ripped jeans, working on her thesis. But when 137 souls were in peril, Reagan Viper Vance became what she had always been, a pilot whose legendary call sign earned the respect of F-22 pilots and whose skills could save anyone who dared to fly. The clandestine world of experimental aviation lost one of its most protected assets. But the world of aviation safety gained something infinitely more precious, a teacher whose knowledge will save lives for generations to come. This story delves into the hidden realm of classified military aviation, showing how the most advanced secret techniques can ultimately be used to save civilian lives, proving that true heroism often resides behind the most unremarkable of appearances.